Okay, we are now live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cootie Cast. My name is Madeline Maye. Joining me, as always, is Jess, Lynne.
AKA the Indomitable Money Groove. Don't worry, I will not be doing the horrible accent, but I had to start with it, just like this cape, which I am now getting rid of because it is really warm.
And in case you can't tell, we are going to be talking about The Last Unicorn, the 80s animation classic. One of my favorite movies. I'm very excited to talk about this. And I know you are also a huge fan of this movie.
Yeah, I think this is our first for the cast, and that it's a movie that we've both already seen.
Yes.
Because we've kind of been alternating, one person's seen one person's seen the other. So this is one of my childhood favorite movies.
Yes, and I'm someone who came to it later in life and thought it was incredible. We recently saw a screening in a theater. We went to Vidiots, for those of you in Los Angeles, screening of the movie, and it was just as amazing as I remember. I cried, very gross tears.
I missed it.
She was crying too. I was there.
I did.
We were all crying. But it is a really beautiful movie, and I'm really excited to talk about it today.
Me too. So let's hop right in. So starting with just a little bit of the history, and I apologize, you can see my lovely tablet glow here. So the movie is from 1982, and it was produced by Rankin and Bass. They did a couple of really good animated movies before they got into all the claymation stuff. I don't know, Madeline, if you want to talk a little bit more.
Yeah, well, Rankin Bass got their start really doing television Christmas specials. I mean, we've all heard of the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Santa Claus is Coming to Town.
And if you haven't, it's December. You will.
Rudolph, in particular, has always been one of my favorite. That is one of my go-to every year. I have to see the original Rankin Bass, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. They've made a bunch of holiday movies. Bunch of really weird ones. Like, once you get past, like, the kind of known Christmas ones, you get the stuff like Rudolph's Shiny New Year or Rudolph and Frosty Christmas in July. Movies that don't make any sense whatsoever, but they're kind of fascinating for how just kind of batshit crazy they are.
They're definitely a vibe. I
They
very
are a
much
vibe.
remember the Heat Miser, Snow Miser one. I don't know which movie that was, but it's one of them.
Oh, we have somebody in the chat, Mark Wyant, saying girl. Hey, Mark. Thanks for joining us. The other notable thing they made were the Hobbit movies. The original, big animated.
The 1970s.
The 1970s ones, yeah. Which I don't know a lot about. I'm not really a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I like them, but,
See, my dad was a huge Lord of the Rings fan, so he showed the Hobbit movies to me when I was far too young. So I have a lot of experience with these, being scared as a child by these traumatic movies.
I remember they are quite violent. I do remember seeing the riddle sequence as a kid. And that's really all I remember. And that was even before, that was even before the new ones came out. As far as my timeline as a human being, that I saw that animation and then the live action movies came out, which is just kind of what Lord of the Rings is to this day. Totally separate podcast, but it is kind of a shame that, like, Lord of the Rings just become like what Peter Jackson did, as opposed to like all of these more interesting interpretations that we've had of the source material before then. I guess I kind of blame Bakshi for that also, because his stuff was also very influential on Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings.
Well, there you go. But coming back to this, when we're talking about a fantasy screenplay that is almost one-to-one to the book, that's The Last Unicorn. So The Last Unicorn was a book published in 1968 by Peter S. Beagle. And I've also, because I am the super fan in this one, have read the book.
Mm-hmm.
And when we saw the screening at Vidiots, there was actually a foreword by Peter S. Beagle.
Yeah.
Very cool, very long, rambly story that didn't seem to relate, but it was very charming.
He is quite old at this point, and I love him for it. Very cute, man.
And Peter S. Beagle also wrote the screenplay, so that's partially why it is really just like one-to-one from what the book is. And it's just got this huge star-studded cast.
Yeah, oh my god, like, some of the names you're kind of shocked are in this movie. Then again, it is also 1982, so you're like, oh, you know, like, for instance, Christopher Lee is in this movie, but also remembering that before Lord of the Rings, not a lot of people outside of genre fans really knew who Christopher Lee was, unfortunately, because he was the horror guy for a very, very long time.
Not as famous as Vincent Price, though.
Not as famous as Vincent Price. Definitely, he was the bigger name. You have,
May I jump in?
Yes, please, thank you. She has. You have a computer. Why you can do this? Why am I doing this? Yeah.
Alan Arkin, who played Schmendrick. There's Jeff Bridges, who is, he works for the he works for the character who is kind of the nothing burger character who plays Prince Lear. But there are just some line reads off Jeff Bridges that are like, oh, this man, I don't have any proof, but I'm sure there was some cocaine involved.
Yeah. Alan Arkin seems to have just been given, like, freedom to say what because there's some, like, lines he has that, like, he is improving. He's making this up. This doesn't make any sense. He just starts saying Alan Arkin lines after a certain point. So it's like, all right, I guess they just kind of let him go loose.
And Jeff Bridges has some line reads that are like, no!
Mm-hmm.
But maybe not quite that emotional.
No.
And then, so the unicorn is played by Mia Farrow. We have, Tammy Grimes, Christopher Lee, Keenan Wynn, like Renee Auberjois, who, those Star Trek fans like me, they'll know him from Odo from Deep Space Nine. So, like, this is one of those few movies, I think, where you watch it later and are like, there are so many more layers than you get the first time you watch it. Like, it gets better upon each rewatch, in my opinion.
Also has Paul Frees, just to remind you that it is a Rankin Bass production.
There is Paul Frees, yes.
Yes.
So, let's go into the plot summary, and I'll try to keep this brief. Basically, the movie starts off with two hunters going into a forest who say that there's the last unicorn. And there is a unicorn there who overhears them saying she's the last. And she immediately in voiceover is like, I can't possibly be the last unicorn.
Yeah.
There's something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And a butterfly comes in, singing all the classics. Have you seen The Muffin Man? Just like litany of songs. And she asks him if he's seen any other unicorns, and he is just gone.
This segment is both too long and too short simultaneously. Because I feel like I could watch this butterfly guy forever, but also, God, I want this scene to end so badly at the same time. It's mixed, because I do kind of love him. It's hard,
I do love the butterfly, and this is the only time we see him.
Yeah, he's gone after this.
Just butterfly on the wind.
Mm-hmm.
But so she's about to leave, because he's not giving her anything useful. He's just singing songs and being silly. And he says, no, wait, and then gets the serious voice and the serious gravitas hat, and tells her that there were once other unicorns, but the Red Bull drove them all into the sea one by one. And she doesn't fully believe him, but now there's at least two different entities that have said the unicorns are gone. So she flees the forest, starts traveling down the road, and, a man tries to catch her, but she gets away, and she's just traveling kind of long journey to try and find the other unicorns.
Hold on, we're getting a audio thing. Yeah, that's probably because of the microphone. I'm going to be moving it closer if we are coming in quiet. How is that? Is that better? I mean, obviously, I don't want to get too cut off from all of y'all, but I can also fix that by moving this. So,
any better?
Is this any better?
I can also project as much as I can, breathe in this top.
It's probably just going to be what it is.
Okay,
maybe I can move more close to you, like that. Yeah, that works. Is that better, name displayed? Can you hear? Oh, I have another solution. Give me 1 sec. Keep going with your summary while I take care of, I think I know the problem is.
I can also start being the butterfly. Can you see the Muffin Man? I must take the A train.
I fixed it. So it should be a lot louder now, right? Okay.
So, back to the summary. So the butterflies told her that. Thank you, name displayed.
Yes.
So the butterflies told her that all the unicorns have been driven into the sea. She flees the forest and is going on this very long journey where she falls asleep at the side of the road. And as she falls asleep at the side of the road, a witch comes upon her.
Yes.
And they have a carnival crew. There is a magician and a lackey.
So lackey, there's a bunch of other creatures. We find out that Schmedrick, the Alan Arkin character, is very funny. I mean, his name is Schmedrick, which is so incredible. The witches using these spells to make these animals seem like they're more ferocious than they actually are. But there is also just a real animal. There's this idea of needing to, like, create illusions or, like, this fakeness in order to be believed as who you are, which is a theme that kind of recurs throughout the rest of the film.
But backtracking just a minute, so the witch puts the unicorn to sleep and captures her. And then puts her in this sideshow with all of these other fake magical creatures and the one real one.
Yeah. Basically, to keep it brief, something happens, the unicorn gets free, and this other creature is like a harpy gets out, kills the witch. We get the first companion, which is Schmedrick.
So Schmendrick is the one that freed the unicorn.
Yes.
So his boon is to go with her. So she lets him go with her. So, and they leave after a very horrific scene that scarred me as a child, which we will describe a little later.
We'll come back to it, because it's very intense. Next, she and Schmedrick meet a gang of bandits in the woods, which Schmedrick uses magic with the unicorn's help to create mystical Robin Hood characters, which...
So the bandits all go chasing the Robin Hood characters because they were trapped. Schmendrick was captured.
Yes.
So they all go chasing and running away, except for the two leaders who come back, capture Schmendrick, and tie him to a tree that he brings to life as a woman because humor.
And also the tree has big boobs. That's why
it's
a big...
Yeah, we're just going to move past. This is the one part that I personally think does not hold up. So
is that in the book also, the big-tittied tree?
I believe so, but I don't remember. I'd have to reread that part. It's one of those parts of the movie and the book that I've tried to forget.
Mm-hmm.
So the unicorn saves him from the tree, and they're going back to travel when they meet their next companion.
Who we are introduced as the wife of the bandit gang leader. But she reveals herself to be the character that Jess is kind of cosplaying as right now. So why don't you talk about her?
Sure. So this is Molly Grew. Molly Grew is basically, she's kind of seen as a salty character, but has a heart of gold. That's literally how Captain Cully describes her. And she has a moment with the unicorn that I'll get into later, but she's not happy to see the unicorn at first, and then joins the quest and tells Schmendrick immediately he is going the wrong way.
Mm-hmm. Love to see it. After much travel, we finally get to the castle that they've been trying to get to, and we see the Red Bull kind of confirming all of these stories and rumors we've heard throughout the film that this is what's happening. The bull tries to run our lead unicorn off a cliff like he's some of the other unicorns, so Schmedrick casts a spell to turn her into a human being.
Yeah, he says he cast a spell to turn her into something that's not a unicorn so that the Red Bull can't find her, and this magic chooses the shape of a human, which everyone is very, very unhappy with.
Yes, especially the unicorn is very upset to be a human, which when I first saw this, I had extreme vibes, like, oh my god, like, I can absolutely relate to the feeling of being in the wrong body. I know you had a different interpretation. We'll get to that a little later.
No, I think both reads are valid. It's just not one I would have thought of being cisgender.
Mm-hmm. But point is that this allows them to infiltrate the castle, which has Christopher Lee
as King Haggard. And Jeff Bridges as Prince Lear.
Yes.
So they go into the castle. There's another magician, but they have a magician battle where, the unicorn wins rather than Schmendrick winning.
Mm-hmm.
And King Lear is convinced there is something wrong with the unicorn, who is now going by the Lady Amalthea.
Yes. This is kind of the rest of the film is a lot of, like, atmosphere. We get a lot of moments of Amalthea being sad, looking forlorn into oceans. We meet a talking pirate cat for a brief moment.
Yarr.
Which is pretty great. All of this leads to the discovery that it was King Lear who was behind everything. He was the one that was using the Red Bull to collect all of the unicorns for himself because he's a greedy man that can never be happy. And while this is happening, Jeff Bridges' character is falling in love with Amalfi.
Yes. So he is, like, going on quests, trying to slay dragons, trying to do things to win her, which is not working until suddenly it doid. Also, thank you, Name Displayed, for recognizing my cosplay. So he, like, eventually they do fall in love. Lady Amalthea is trying to forget ever having become the unicorn and is starting to accept being human. There is a very scary confrontation with, King Lear, and then they figure out the riddle. There has been a riddle that's been going on this whole time. The cat reveals that they have to get the skull to speak and the clock to strike at the right time. So they go down and find the talking skull, who is Rene Auberjois, who is just, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, who is also just making fun of them, wanting to play with them, doesn't actually want to help. So the way that they convince him to help is to bribe him. Schmendrick turns water into wine to give to him, which he gets drunk and tells them to go through the clock. And so they all start to go through, but when the Lady Amalthea goes, he loses his shit. He basically is like, no, not that one, and screams for Haggard. Prince Lear is not with them, but finds them. He goes through immediately after. Schmendrick stays behind, and Haggard and Schmendrick have a battle, basically, where Schmendrick is dodging and trying to get away, and he eventually does escape, but King Haggard destroys the clock. So the only way forward is now through the Red Bull's passage. And as they're getting closer, they have to reveal everything, who the unicorn is, to Prince Lear, who did not know.
Yes, and Prince Lear, for his part, is like, yeah, I still love you, even if you're a horse woman. So good for him. We get some emotional confrontations that I want to touch on a little later. But it leads us to getting to the beach that we see throughout this film, into the water, and here is where the unicorns, perhaps following Amalfi's example, all kind of get together and, like, join forces to...
Well,
we're
skipping some stuff, so backtrack in just a minute. So the Red Bull is there, sees Lady Amalthea, and at this point knows who she is. And basically Lear stands up to protect her, and he kills Lear.
Yes.
So then Schmendrick reverses the magic, and the Lady Amalthea becomes a unicorn. And she is running, but sees Lear's body and turns back and fights. And instead drives the Red Bull into the sea. And as that happens, then all of the other unicorns come free.
Yes.
And King Haggard screams, and the castle crumbles with him in it. Presumably all the magic that he'd amassed over the years holding the unicorns is crumbled. So he falls into the sea and dies. The unicorn uses her power to bring Prince Lear back to life. And then she kind of goes up into the hills. Yes.
And that's basically the end of the movie. The unicorn, who is just now, Unicorn is her name again, expresses, like this, how much the journey has taught her, has affected her. She is now back to where she is. She and Prince Lear did not get back together at the end, and it's all explained to be for the best, considering they are from completely separate worlds. And Schmendrick and Molly, I'm so tired. Molly get together at the end. Good for them.
Yep. The last conversation is between Schmendrick and the unicorn.
Yes.
So Prince Lear does not get his final goodbye.
No. She is already gone by the time Prince Lear gets up, I believe. Yes. Okay. And that's the movie. In a nutshell. It's very simple and it's very basic, which I think really works in its favor because it is a fairy tale first and foremost. So a lot of things that happen follow a fairy tale like dream logic more than it follows like a strict plot structure logic. Like everybody kind of knows what needs to happen. Everybody kind of knows what the fate is. Everybody kind of has everything together. And I think it works well in a story like this where a lot of the stuff is not only, fairy tale like and is actually a fairy tale, but it allows for the thematic elements to shine through a lot brighter because of how simple everything kind of surrounding it is.
I also want to say, I think the movie does something very, very smart, which is the pacing is so well done, and part of it is where the other place they spent their budget. The animation quality is also very good, it very much works for what it's telling, but the big place that I, and part of why I fell in love with this movie is they use big name songs, they have really good music.
Mm-hmm.
The opening song is by America, a lot of the other songs are written by Jimmy Webb, and so they're, anytime there's, a montage or a long scene, it's using the music, and that's I can sing the opening song by heart because
Mm-hmm.
I watched it enough.
It really is beautiful. This is it feels more artsy a lot of times than it does like a strict narrative film because, like you said, we get these long portions of the film where they're traveling and there's music and there's all this beautiful scenery that kind of just works together really well. It kind of reminds me of the original Land Before Time, which had a similar use of just amazing audio, not songs, but an amazing score, and to show these beautiful images of travel, that in that case the dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so, and it also, especially in the beginning, because when the opening credits and they do the Last Unicorn song, they also, the art style matches unicorn tapestries.
Yes.
Which, and it's very clearly referencing at, tapestry imagery. So, the art is also, it works so well with the music, which without those pieces, I think the story would fall very flat.
Yes, every element works really well together. The animation, I think, specifically, is really, really cool. There's something about the 70s, 80s era of at least Western animation, even though that's not quite what we'll get to that in a second. But this era of animation, because Disney was no longer kind of on top, it allowed for much weirder things to kind of happen and kind of get through that maybe if there was more pressure to beat Disney may not have happened. And this definitely feels like a film that exists because there was a gap that needed to be filled, that wasn't being filled by the giant company that would have been Disney. Because at this time they were making not a whole lot that was doing well at the box office. Not that this was a huge box office success. I think it was kind of, I don't know if did it make money or was moderate.
I believe it made money, but I don't think it was a huge.
Yeah, a small success. Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do a sequel.
Which aren't we lucky for that, right?
Thank God.
But no, it's also a much more adult story.
Yes.
I watched it as a child and loved it as a child, but this is one of those movies where when you age with it, the themes still work. You get a more depth of an understanding of what it is, and as I said, except for maybe one scene, which thankfully is short,
Mm-hmm.
everything else really works.
Yeah. Like I said, I saw it for the first time as an adult, having heard for years how great it was and I would love it. And also, I saw it a year before I came out. And I remember being very affected by the themes and messages of it and not really knowing why until, a year later when I came out as trans. And this message of being yourself and being forced to be something that you're not in order to appease society or to make things work for you really hit me, which is why I was crying so hard in the movie theater, because it kind of all came back to me. How sad it is to not be who you are. For any reason. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the content of one of the songs. Personally, not what I would say is one of the stronger songs, but it is a very meaningful one. It's the song Now That I'm a Woman.
Yes.
Now that I'm a woman, everything has changed.
Yeah. And I just remember watching, like, I wish I want to be a unicorn. I don't want to be a person. Whatever thought I had while watching it. I could, if I watched this as a kid, if I had seen this film as a kid, this would have been in regular rotation. I can tell you that. It has all of the elements that I love about movies like this. But also that theme appears throughout the movie, because we also have this earlier sequence of the circus where the animals are also being forced to be something that they're not through the use of illusions. And even, like, the unicorn has to be a fake unicorn in order for people to see that she is any kind of unicorn. It's maybe stretching the metaphor a little bit, but it's almost like by giving into stereotypes, that's the only way people will see you for who you actually are and how problematic that can be.
I think for that one, it's probably, or at least in my interpretation, is a little more literal, which is, there's a belief that most people can't see unicorns. The unicorns don't exist in the world, so people have forgotten them.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be the kind of person who can see a unicorn and recognize it. And that's our party members, both Schmendrick and Molly, recognize her. And I think that's part of why they become important characters. And I would argue maybe even more so than Prince Lear, who is more of a means to an end, I would say.
Right. I think that's also interesting. Like, this idea of, like, needing to be in the right set of mind. There's this idea of needing this, like, innocence. Or it's either innocence or just kind of having magic being kind of part of that world's another way to kind of see it. But this idea that, like, the world of humans has progressed beyond magic. It's an old kind of fairy tale trope. Even Lord of the Rings has similar ideas. This idea of, like, once humanity kind of comes in and starts to know the world, a lot of the magic of the world disappears, and that's what happens to the unicorn. Like, even though, like, there is this unicorn, there's just, like, the opening of the movie is a guy saying, there's a unicorn here, and his younger compatriots like, there's no such thing as unicorns, what are you talking about? And he's like, no, they're here, hey, just hang out. And his, I'm talking about so many things here, I apologize. His response is like, stay here, don't leave, like, be a unicorn, be in this forest, which is also ironically what starts her journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because she overhears that. I think also it's not that magic doesn't exist in the world, although that does happen to an extent, and I would argue this gets into one of my central themes that I saw in this movie, which is this is a very anti-capitalist movie.
Yes.
The villains of this movie, all of them, and there are two main ones, but there are three, all want to capture and possess her or capture and possess someone.
Yes. It's hierarchical, for sure. And that comes with the central conflict of the film, which is that the king has captured all of the unicorns for no other reason than just because he wants them. Like, there is no, it's not like he's using them for any, he just wants to have them, which means nobody else gets them. And that is kind of the ultimate result of power, is power just for the sake of power, to have a thing that only you have and nobody else can have.
And by extension, if you're taking this as, like, what they are in the story, which is the unicorn's the source of magic in the world, the protection of the forest, like, it's not just that only he can have them, though that is what he wants, but it's also that nobody else can, access the resources. Like, he is the ultimate one percenter that we would think of today.
Yeah.
And, also very fitting that, I'm pretty sure Peter S. Beagle is Jewish, named after, a character of biblical evil, King Haggard. So.
Yeah. I think it also goes into Prince Lear, who unknowingly is doing the same thing, where he is trying to take Amalfi's hand in marriage by having her in a way that only benefits him and what he wants versus what she actually wants. So
to explain that just a little bit.
Yeah.
Basically, and I'm much more sympathetic to Lear than I am to King Haggard. And to backtrack just a sec, King Haggard, like, he has a beautiful monologue. Like, I think he is an excellent villain.
Yes.
Because not only is he well drawn, well acted, all of the wonderful things that he is, but his motivations in the story make sense. He is not happy. He is not happy with anything. The unicorns are the only thing that makes him happy. So instead of going out to where the unicorns are or becoming the foremost scholar on unicornology or whatever it would be in the world, he has managed to find this magical creature of the Red Bull somehow and has captured all of the unicorns. And that's the way he handles it. And he does not have a court. You know, his staff are like 4 people. And his son is one of those people. So his son does not know how to relate to people. So he just knows what women like in stories. And that's the way he starts, by trying to court Lady Amalthea. He tries to slay a dragon for her. And he does. And when he brings her the head, she looks at him sadly. And he said, "I felt sorry I killed it."
Yeah. And I think that's, again, also really interesting. This idea, for whatever reasons that Prince Lear is doing this, it all still comes down to he doesn't ask her what she wants or the things that she needs in order to go in. He does what he thinks needs to happen, but doesn't actually go to say, like, what does Amalfi want or need in this situation. He's just like, well, I think this is going to work. But if he made an attempt to try and understand her, which he maybe does more towards the end of the film.
So then that's where I was going to push back.
Yes.
At first, I would agree that he just starts by trying to go on the hero's journey, because that's what women want. But when that doesn't work, he starts trying to ask her, but she won't talk to him. So then he goes to Molly, who does. And that actually starts to get through. But it's not just that he's getting through. He is genuinely trying to be a good person. He's trying to be a hero for her, and successfully turns himself into one. But he also... she uses him as a means of forgetting a past she doesn't want to remember.
I think it's both that and, to use a little literal interpretation, seemingly an effect of the magic that Schmedrick has put on her, that she just seems to, as she stays human longer, forgets her life of being a unicorn. And arguably, now that I think about it, you could say that Prince Lear takes advantage of her in a very vulnerable state to push her towards a direction that is more befitting to him than maybe what she wants. Especially when she's in that state of, like, kind of remembering, kind of not remembering. He's like, oh, I'm just going to do this.
I mean, I would push back on that, because he doesn't, if she doesn't tell him no, and then he stops, and they only have the romance after she asks him to make her forget. Like, she is vulnerable, but she's the one that pursues it at that point. He's trying, but he's not being forceful, at least not from what we see.
No, but I think also Prince Lear lacks the emotional capacity to understand that Amalfi is in a difficult place, and that just because she kind of says the thing that he wants to hear, that's not the best reason to do what he wants to do. Because clearly she is distraught and very confused throughout the movie. And obviously, Prince Lear can't predict that she's a unicorn. You know, most people can't. But
that was not in his realm.
That was not in his realm of understanding dragons. Totally fine. But yeah, I guess I am painting Prince Lear as more of a villain here. Even though I don't think he is a villain, I think he's just naive and innocent. I think that's probably his big crime.
I mean, I wouldn't even say it's a crime. And granted, at this point, and this is upon rewatch, because as a child, I didn't pick up on this, but when we watched the movie recently, I found myself being frustrated with the unicorn when she is Lady Amalthea, because she is not connecting to anyone. She is leaving everyone behind, very much like being off on her lonesome. And like, there's one scene where she is explicitly making fun of Schmendrick being a fool, and like how she doesn't care about him anymore. And Molly points out, no, he's doing this for you. He's doing this so that you stay safe while we figure out what to do for your quest. And that, like, it's a tough thing. Like, I have empathy for her, but she's also not having empathy for the people around her. But it's also when she's losing herself. But it's hard, but it's also just like she's not innocent as a victim in this moment. She's doing things that are unlikable.
It is difficult, and again, I think with, like how I was talking about before, I really do relate to Amalfi as a trans woman, because the idea of being something that you truly are not, to be in this vessel that isn't who you are, is very paralyzing. So I understand her desire or need to just, like, not exist, because she basically wishes it herself. Like, she wishes she was dead rather than to be something that she really isn't. And I think, sure, like, being a unicorn's really cool, and to say, like, oh, now you're a measly human, like, grow up. Like, I get that aspect of it as well. But I also think just thinking it from, like an identity place, like, as a unicorn, she has a very strict, like, sense of what she understands and what she believes. The film even talks about this, that at the end of the movie, she learns regrets, which is something a unicorn has never had before, because unicorns have a very specific purpose. They have a very specific thing that they believe in, that they do, because they are seen as, like, the ultimate innocent creature. But she is thrust into a world and a body where all of those things are hitting her all at once, while she is also forced to be something that she is not. So for me, I guess I forgive a lot of her more problematic areas in that sense, because I guess I can kind of relate to, sometimes you can act shitty when you're in, like, a really shitty state like that. I don't think it justifies, but I think it does at least provide a reason as to, like, why she is doing all of these things.
No, I understand that, and I do think, ultimately, I obviously forgive her. I love the character, even though she is not the character I identify the most with.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that it's interesting to think of it from the realm of body dysmorphia, which I absolutely think fits, though it's not one I necessarily saw it in the same way. I wouldn't go so far as to say she's a trans character.
No, I don't think anyone was thinking that wrote it.
Yeah, it's not even just that they're not thinking about who wrote it. I think when they were writing it, they were more thinking about what it would be like to be an immortal forced into mortality.
Yes, which I agree. I completely agree with.
But I think the read is also interesting and valid, and partially why I enjoy talking about these things with you so much, because you see things that I don't. Whereas I saw this as my overall theme as any win, any successful journey that you are going to take on when it has these kind of stakes, it cannot happen without great personal cost. You may still value it, you may still come up out of it saying this was totally worth it, but the act of going through this quest hurt the unicorn. She is ultimately grateful for that too. She is grateful to have fallen in love with Lear, and she will always remember him. She is grateful to have made friends with Schmendrick and Molly. And I do want to talk a little bit more about Schmendrick's friendship, because I think we have kind of glossed over that. And he is her first friend, and the one she ends up talking to, like, he's the one she closes out with. But through the process of saving the unicorns in the world, which she did not have to do, she could have just stayed in her forest and not ever been caught. She has done a great good by releasing the unicorns back into the world, which are a source of purity and goodness and magic, but she has harmed herself, and that's not a harm that will ever be undone.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, there are positives and negatives to that. Like, the film sets us up in the beginning by having the man who was hunting in the forest say, do not expose yourselves to the world of men and all this stuff. Like, live in your forest, be innocent. And by doing her journey, she's able to do it, but she also does get to, unfortunately, experience all the good and bad that comes from humanity, which is love, and also the hatred, the anger that comes across from it. Like, in this sense, her acting out towards her friends is her experiencing that negative that negative attitude, that negative emotion that people have. So she gets these moments of weakness that she, as an immortal unicorn, really couldn't understand before. And I think it makes her a very interesting, a very complicated character.
No, I agree. And even for her moments of unlikability, I think it makes her stronger as a character.
Exactly.
Because people aren't perfectly likable. You don't need to be a perfect victim to deserve sympathy. And kind of on that front, there is maybe the most perfect villain, which is not King Haggard. The most perfect villain is the witch, Mommy Fortuna.
Yes. This whole sequence we kind of skipped over, but it is really interesting. This kind of first trial that the unicorn has, where she gets captured by this witch into a circus, where she uses illusion magic to make animals seem like more than they actually are. And kind of going back to what I said before, it's really interesting that she has to make a unicorn look like a fake unicorn in order for people to see her illusion magic on it and to appear to them to be a real unicorn.
There's a lot in this movie. There are themes, at least I think it's a secondary theme, but there are themes about authenticity and reality and what that means. And this whole sequence, that's what this is about. So to go a little bit more into it, there are 3 real creatures, in my opinion, in Mommy Fortuna's carnival. And she only recognizes 2 of them. So the wizard Smendrick, or the magician Smendrick, he's there, but she thinks he's just, he's a Smendrick, he's a fool, he's there to do the least amount of magic. And she calls him over when she sees the unicorn sleeping and just assumes he won't see the unicorn, which he immediately does, but knows better than to trust her and tell her that.
Right.
So, and the thing, this is the unicorn's journey, but it's also Schmendrick's journey. It is Schmendrick's journey into becoming a real magician, but it's also his journey into doing that through his care for other people.
Yes. He learns to believe in himself by other people believing in him. It's kind of that ultimate, getting strength from those around you, because he had the magic in him all along. What he needed was the confidence and the help of his companions and his friends. On the contrast of that, we have the witch, who is completely solitary and is a gigantic egomaniac. Her folly comes from her believing so highly in what she does that she makes very dumb decisions because she has such a high opinion of herself.
I would argue on that one, but also I want to point out the witch is voiced, Mommy Fortuna, she's voiced by Angela Lansbury. Amazing, just wonderful, 10 out of 10. But so the other real creature, which we referenced briefly, so the real creatures in the carnival, I would argue, the first 2 are no question, the third is Schmendrick himself, but so it's the unicorn and it's the harpy Seleno.
Yes.
And the harpy Seleno is monstrous. Basically, she's a giant vulture with 3 breasts that are exposed for our very much displeasure.
It's not, someone out there you've had your fun, and I'm happy for you. You don't need us for that. But anyway, but again, kind of what I was saying, even the henchmen of the witch is hey, don't keep this around. This is clearly a bad thing. And the witch is no, I'm going to do it. And she's also kind of ready for death, which is another interesting aspect of her character, because she says, this harpy is going to kill me one day, and that's just what it is.
And that is actually my counter argument.
Yeah.
It's not that she's so arrogant that she thinks that this harpy will never kill her. It's that she thinks that the harpy killing her is worth it for her own version of immortality.
Yes. Because of the story. She talks about how she is the witch that did this. She is the witch that captured the unicorn, that captured a harpy. For her, it is all about her story. I guess going, again, into these themes of immortality, what is the story that makes people remember her?
And and I think that's why this works so well. Each character, each villain, no matter how large or small, they have a motivation. Hers is she wants to be immortal. She can't get it even through her magic, and she's very old. So she's going to get it through caging immortal beings.
And it's all told through familiar fantasy tropes. Not in a way that's makes it feel like, oh, been there, done that, but in a way that kind of elevates the thematic elements of the movie by having this very, very simple but very effective story with things that we know. Like, we know unicorns, we know witches, we know all of these things. We're prepped for all the stuff that's in there, but the way in it which it's presented to present these emotional conclusions, these thematic conclusions, are just, it's just so well done. It just reminds me of, like, when fairy tales are bad, you know, and they're not interesting at all. You know, like, seeing, like, how these elements done so well here is just like, God, I've seen the same movie, but, like, bad a million times. And it's just, to me, it is kind of fascinating.
It is. I mean, and it's not to say there aren't plot holes, because there are.
But for me, it's like, it's a fairy tale. Like, that's not the point.
Exactly. Yeah. Because this movie is so well done, you don't ask, how did King Haggard get the Red Bull? It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. No.
But
how does everybody know everybody? That's my favorite thing about fairy tales. Like, oh, I recognize that person. Like, how? How do you recognize this person? There's no phones. Everyone just knows everything.
But it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It's a fairy tale. Who cares?
But if it were a worse done story, you'd notice.
Yes.
And you'd question.
Exactly.
But coming back to this, so Mommy Fortuna has chosen her death, and when, you know, the unicorn gets out and she decides to free the Harpy Solano, because she wants to free all of the animals, and she wants to free the Harpy, especially because they are both real.
Yes.
And that gets back to authenticity versus fakeness. So she frees all of them, which, even at the time, I've always wondered about this scene, because a lot of the animals, despite not being magical, they're very much animals that have lived in captivity, that have disabilities. Mm-hmm. Would they survive in freedom? But they're all freed anyway. Like, the chimpanzee has a twisted foot, the lion is broken tooth and old.
It's definitely not something the film questions, or, yeah, that's not part of the movie, unfortunately.
No, it's, and I'm not even saying it should be, but it is one of those moments where, like, you can question the unicorn's character in a couple things. Yeah. And this is a decision you question, or at least I did. I think it makes her more interesting. And they free the Harpy, who goes after everyone around. And the unicorn has to tell Spendrick to walk away, don't run, never run from anything immortal, because it attracts their attention. And They walk away as the Harpy is circling, and then very graphically lands on Mommy Fortuna. You don't see blood, but you know what's happening. Mm-hmm. And before the scene ends, you see everybody's dead bodies, and the Harpy flies off into the world to have her own adventures.
Good for her.
And the reason I'm describing this in such detail now, this was the scene that terrified me. Like, this was the moment. Like, the Red Bull is scary, it's a good design, but they got nothing on Solano.
Yeah, seeing this for the first time, I immediately thought of the later movie, We're Back, a Dinosaur Story, which has the similar bird-based mayhem.
However, not a connection I would have made, even though I did see that as a child.
But that was the film that scared the shit out of me as a kid. Was that moment particular I remember being very traumatic as a child. But yeah, I am agreeing with you that I think there's an intentional pomposity to the unicorn character for being, like, above everyone else and believing that she's kind of more than the things around her, for being this immortal creature. And I do think part of her journey is hubris, like anything else.
Yes, I agree. And I don't think she gets over it. Like, I don't think that's her character arc.
No, but I think that is perhaps a part of her growth, is to learn things, because we can argue that her not knowing the ways of humans is itself a very privileged position to have, where now that she has experienced it, she can kind of come back and say, well, now I've had this feeling and I'm different now because I've experienced this, versus the other unicorns that she even says she can't really fully relate to them anymore because of this.
Mm-hmm. Though I'd argue, how much did she relate to them in the beginning if they've been gone for 50 years and she didn't notice?
Well, that clearly they don't talk to each other. They all just have like one forest that they hang out at. Like
they have that unicorn conference every 100 years. They all catch up, but otherwise they're just off in their own forest doing their own thing.
Yeah. Oh, ever since they closed down BronyCon, like it's just they don't have these conventions anymore.
I mean, you know, they created BronyCon for this, right?
You know what? Like COVID had a lot of things. You know, it really messed up this world in ways we don't talk about.
And the worst part is they're not going to discover it until like 100 years from now.
They don't tell the Pegasi either where the conference is, which is really rude of them. Pegasi try to come in. They're like, I know, we're in Dallas. Oh, I'm sorry, you're in Austin? My bad. I guess you gave you the wrong... They're very awful.
Terrible tricking those Pegasi into going to Texas.
Terrible. I hate them. I hate them. I want to... going off into a completely separate line of thought towards this movie... the design of the unicorn is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, which is fitting because she is supposed to be one of the most beautiful creatures in the world. And I remember just immediately falling in love with her design and thinking, if I was a unicorn, I would want to look like her. She is... a lot of the animation team is from Japan, which is also... a lot of the early Rankin Bass stop motion animations were made in Japan as well.
Toei Animation, headed by Toru Hara, which is what I was looking up.
Yes, and I believe a lot of the people from this animation team did go to join Studio Ghibli later on, and to be part of that team. And you can honestly see it more here than I think in a lot of the other Rankin Bass, because, like, the unicorn really does look like something out of, like, Space Battleship Yamato, or, like, the people, or like, that team's one of their more recent creations, the Daft Punk music video series that they did for Discovery, where it's a lot of, like, long, kind of, like...
She doesn't look just like a horse with a horn. She looks almost more like an antelope or a gazelle.
Yes. And it also extends to when she becomes a human. It again kind of goes into that very kind of old, like, 70s, 80s style of anime and character design that was really popular in Japan.
Yeah, you could also see references for things like, you know, especially when she's a human, the Lady Amalthea looks like a character from the last scene of Heavy Metal, the original Heavy Metal movie.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is definitely... part of what's going on. The animation for the budget that it had is pretty remarkable. Obviously, it's not like Pinocchio levels of
it's not
technically
smooth.
It's not smooth. Like, clearly they had to work with what they have, but what they did was amazing. And I maintain that when the scene of the unicorns in the ocean waves is still one of the most beautiful sequences I've ever seen.
Oh,
in
it's
an animation
gorgeous.
film.
It's one of those things that I've wanted to paint for years. And
yeah,
someday
it's
I'll get around to it.
Always in my head. And honestly, I mean, you can point to that to something like similar sequences in Ponyo from Studio Ghibli, which I imagine there's probably some connection there between some of those teams of how they're animating.
I can believe that.
Yeah.
And I mean, even all the small details, like the motion might not be as smooth, but I don't think it needs to be.
No.
But the backgrounds, they're so well detailed and gorgeous. Like, there's one point where Lear is going off to slay the dragon, and he is riding along the ocean, and you see in the ocean, you see the surf, which is heavily implied that that's what the unicorns actually are. They're the surf.
Yes.
But also, next to the unicorns is a pod of narwhals.
Mm-hmm.
Which the unicorns of the sea, the animals hunted to endangerment because of their ivory horns that were sold as unicorn horns, which I would not have put together as a kid, but as an adult, I'm just like,
yeah, it's a really beautiful movie. It's extremely effective. It's paced really well. You know, like maybe if you need more narrative in a film, maybe it's not going to be as entertaining for you, but then I don't know, because I'm not that kind of person. I thought the first Land Before Time movie's the best one. I'm that kind of person.
To be fair, you're right.
I'm also right, but there are people that are like, there's not enough story in the first Land Before Time movie. And I'm like, you can have your thoughts. I'm gonna enjoy the best movie ever made.
I think this has got a great story that works really well, and with the music, like, you know, I'm going to sing it because I can't help it.
Yes.
When the last eagle flies over the last dawning morning, Like that just like haunting melody at the beginning with the tapestry animation, like it will get you every time.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful movie.
And speaking of the last big theme I want to hit.
Yes.
And probably my favorite moment of this movie, which has changed because when I was a kid, my favorite moment was the butterfly. Loved it.
It's very fun.
But as an adult, it is when Molly Grew confronts the unicorn. So we kind of glossed over it before in the summary. Basically, Molly has fallen in with this group of thieves. She is acting as the wife of the captain, but she does not seem to enjoy being there. She does not enjoy the thieves. She feels like she's always stretched too thin. So she's very much looking for her out. And after everybody goes running after the illusionary Robin Hood, she comes back. She runs after them and then comes back and then pops out of the forest as Schmendrick is leaving with the unicorn after being freed from the tree. And runs into the unicorn. And at first she's just talking to Schmendrick about where will you go. And I think she was trying to go with Schmendrick regardless just because she wanted somewhere to go.
Yes. She was stuck, yeah.
She immediately spots the unicorn. And her reaction to seeing the unicorn is not, oh my god, or oh, what a beautiful horse, which it seems to be almost everybody else's reaction. Her reaction is, how dare you come to me now that I'm this? Where were you when I was young, when I was beautiful? Where were you 10 years ago, 15 years ago? How can you come to me now? And she is angry. And as a woman somewhat in my older years, 30s, you know, like that hits right here. Like that is the truth of like dealing with aging and what mortality means. And that's, I think, also why it was so hard for the unicorn to become human, because of that mortality. And it hits here too, where there is this moment of, if you've been waiting to see a unicorn as long as I have, right? She's been waiting her whole life, and now she sees it when she doesn't feel like she is fresh or new or the best version of herself. Even though I would argue that she is, because from the moment Molly joins the team, she becomes the one to speak with emotional intelligence for everyone, and the one that pushes Schmendrick to help and pushes Lear to be the best version of himself, and even pushes Lady Amalthea to be more human when she needs to be in those moments.
Well, I think that also kind of hits the point on the head too, is that we don't get to pick these moments where we get to see the thing that we want to see. Sometimes it just happens, and it is a tragedy that, you know, she did not get to see the unicorn when she first felt like she needed it, when she was younger, when she was going through the hardships that led her to be the wife of a bandit leader. But the film is also saying, well, no one can make those choices. It's just, these moments are going to happen, and you need to be ready for them. So if anything, the beauty of the situation is that she was still able to see the unicorn even at her age, which means that she was still ready. Even though she didn't maybe believe it on the surface, deep down, she was still ready for this moment, even if it was late.
And I think also it means that there's no age where you stop being useful, where you stop being good, where you stop being you. Like, in a lot of ways, she's the one that drives the story forward. She finds the skull. She's the one that brings the water that turns into the wine. She's the one that holds everyone together. She drives the story forward. And she's the one that suggests that Schmendrick becomes the king's magician, which is how they get offered into the castle in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, there is no point at where you expire as a useful person.
Exactly. And I think for us as women in our 30s, you know, there is a lot of pressure to just not exist anymore after a certain age, and it's really sad, and it really gets to you sometimes, and you feel, you know, like Molly, you feel like this is the end, this is it. Like, why didn't I have these things when I was quote unquote useful? But the film is saying that you're always useful because you're always who you are. Like, it's not even about like usefulness. It's like, by being who you are, by existing, you know, that is what makes you incredible. And I think that also kind of goes into the trans interpretation, is, you know, the idea of transitioning later in life versus, you know, transitioning before puberty, where quote unquote maybe you would have had a bigger effect. Again, like big air quotes and all of this stuff, but that is something that a lot of trans people or people that kind of make big life decisions like that later on in life think, like, what if I had done this earlier? Like, I wish I had figured this out earlier, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you find out when you're in your 30s, 40s, 80s. Like, that's just kind of how life is. And the important thing is to just be ready and to be available. Like, it's still sad. Like, I think that's important to understand that it is sad and to have that feeling of it being sad. You know, to understand, to have that, to feel your feeling sad, that emotion. But once you're there, to kind of move on and move forward, like Molly does, and to say, like, I have my worth.
I think it's very true for trans people. I think it's true for anybody
Exactly.
who's going through like a major life reinvention. Like if you've ever lost major breakup, a divorce, like changed your jobs, like where you've had to reinvent yourself and you wonder, you're happy now, wonder why you couldn't have been happy all along. I mean, that's true, but the journey is the journey, and you're here now. And I think ultimately that's where I stand on this movie. Like, that was such a brave choice, especially in a children's movie, to have an older woman confront a unicorn and react with real and honest anger about what that would actually be like, and then to choose to forgive anyway.
Yes, I completely agree. It's probably the second most impactful scene to me. My obviously most impactful scene is unicorn turning into a Malfi. Which I remember when I first saw it, like, I'm just, like, bursting into tears. I'm like, why am I crying so effing hard right now? What's going on here? This seems strange. I'll figure that out later. And I did.
And here we are today,
Here
folks.
we are. Like, damn, tears, tell me what's going on. But, yeah, I mean, that's basically the movie. Do you have any final thoughts on anything, last words before we wrap up?
The last words of
the last words until we find the bull that has driven the last words into the sea, and we can bring them back.
No, this movie is brave. It's beautiful. It's meaningful. It is very interesting. You know, remember we always ask, is it interesting instead of is it good? Which
Yeah.
I think this movie is both. But
yes.
It's got so many themes, and you know, I am very glad that you wanted to do this one this time.
Yes.
And got me to rewatch it, and you know, showing it to the people in my life, like one who'd never seen it and one who had forgotten all about it, who also enjoyed
yeah,
it.
I think it's beautiful. I agree with everything you said. I'll say in addition to all of that, because it's also kind of like a theme of this channel and a lot of the other work that I've done, is this idea of what makes art mature, and this idea of, like, what makes art, quote unquote, for adults or for older audiences. And I often get people asking me, like, what does that mean for something to be mature? And I think of this film as the perfect example of that. Like, while it is a children's movie and can be enjoyed by kids, very much so, as you know, there's an example right here, but it's also really intelligent and really real about, like, actual things and feelings and emotions and issues. Like, the fact that this is a G or PG rated movie doesn't make it less mature. And I think when I talk about a piece of art being, like, mature or not mature, I'm not thinking about whether it has, like, even though this film does have nudity, kind of, unfortunately, in very strange instances, or even that it has violence or anything like that. But I think when it has a very, like, an honest respect and understanding of larger themes, I think, and larger issues, that, to me, is what maturity is. That's why a lot of us kind of learn big lessons from, like, great Pixar films or great whatever films, because, like, these movies have that level of maturity about these big issues that sometimes even, like, the hardest X-rated content doesn't.
A lot of the time, at least right in our current rating system, the hardest R stuff doesn't. I mean, it depends. It depends on the movie, and that's a very broad statement. But, like, for me, film maturity, or maturity in any story, really, is this a story I can engage with and keep talking about? It's not a perfect story. That's never the question. But is this something where the themes are real? Can I connect with it in a real way? Does this mean something to me? Will this mean something to me in 10 years? in 20 years, in 30 years. And I can say for this film, it did.
For me, it's like, does the film feel real? Which is more like, has nothing to do with the content or what's happening, or like we said, even if a film has like plot holes or anything like that. Like, obviously, this is a fantasy film that is not real because unicorns do not exist. If you have evidence to the contrary, please let me know in the comments. I will give you all of my money to see it. But it's real in that it feels like a real lived-in world. Like, as fairy tale as The Last Unicorn is, it feels like a lived-in piece of art. It's expressing emotions and themes and characters that are like that are real, that I feel exist in some cosmic way, even though I know they can't possibly exist. But it feels honest. Maybe that's a better word. Like, it feels like a truth is being told here. I don't feel like I'm being lied to or manipulated, in as much as art can obviously manipulate people, but in a way that's like, it just feels like it comes from a true place.
And I think for this story in particular, there is not a single character in a single scene that I can't look at and say, oh, I know why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like, everybody has a reasonable and understandable motivation. It might be simple. There's a farmer at one point that wants to capture to take her to the fair.
Yeah.
But, like, you know what he wants. So, and, like, just to kind of broaden the discussion real quick to something else, when you're talking about a mature film, that is also different than talking about a mature character. For example, a previous film we've done, Jennifer's Body, the characters are very immature.
Yes.
Which is why they react the ways that they do, which don't make sense a lot of the time. But the movie, I would argue overall, maybe less so than this one, but it's still a mature movie.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's still grappling with the inherent sexism that teen girls deal with, and that in a world where they are allowed to be victimized, and what that means, and also the intensity of teen girl friendships and romance, and when those two things sort of collide in unhealthy ways.
Yeah, maturity isn't always the content of the art. It's how the art represents the content within it, is what makes something mature or not. By having, for instance, a horrifying violent scene or a horrifying sexual encounter in a movie by itself does not create maturity. It's how the film presents and reacts to that thing, and how it furthers our understanding of these horrible moments that make a film mature.
And what does that mean within the film, and also how well is that executed?
Yeah. And again, all of these go beyond just like the text Wikipedia summation of this thing happened. It's all about why my favorite word that I always forget, because when I need to think of the word at that moment, it disappears from my brain. But it's always like, it's always how it's being presented. Just by saying like, oh, this is happening, you don't get the full extent of what's actually happening in a piece of art. It's how, it's all about the context of what's happening. And I think that's what makes something mature versus being like, exploitative, a splatterfest, whatever.
And that leads us to the next part of the podcast, which is the next movie, which I would argue is not a mature movie. I can't wait for this one. But the criteria for our podcast is not, is the movie mature, or even is it good? It's, is it interesting?
Yes, and if it's targeted to femme-presenting people.
Is it about or targeted to women or girls? But, as with everything, we make the rules, we can change them.
Absolutely.
However, this one I think fits right in there. So the next movie we're going to be doing is going to be Love Actually.
Christ, yeah. I saw that recently. That'll be an interesting discussion because, oh my gosh. Yeah, good tie-in piece with this one. A movie that's very R-rated and not nearly as mature as this movie. So,
but it sure wants to be, and we're going to discuss that real soon.
Oh gosh. Thank you all so much. Please like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Please check out my other work as well. Jess Lynne lives in a cloud of fog and smog, but she appreciates you saying hi to her.
I do.
here anyway.
And hey, like, subscribe, share to Madeline's channel. Tell her how much you love her work and also how much you love me being in her work, so maybe I'll be in more.
Yeah, if you message me a message to Jess, I'll just tell her. I mean, maybe that's the way. Then I can get really jealous of, like, all the messages to you, and then I can turn, like, my villain arc in my head.
I mean, I can't wait, but the thing is, like, you're gonna get all the money from all this anyway, if we ever make any, so.
Thank God. Anyway, yeah, she's not getting anything. Yeah, new videos coming up soon. I made a brief post about my original idea, ended up getting shelved, which is going to be more of a personal project, because it just wasn't working. Sometimes that happens. Oops. Try your best. You move on. If it doesn't work, move on to something else. So the next video is going to be on the Matrix franchise and why I argue it is a bad trans allegory. Not that it's not a trans allegory. I think that's very possible. But why it's, as a trans allegory, not a very good one. So enjoy that. It's going to be very exciting. Not controversial at all.
And I am here for this. I can't wait. And also, I can't wait to get out of my bodice because I miss taking a full breath.
Wow.
Bye, y'all.
Let's end the broadcast before that happens. Bye, everyone.